The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Get more at servingworlds.com. 13. Mission accomplished. Lee dropped the sniper rifle, turned, and ran flat out for his mech. Bullets strafed the roof from two different angles. Miraculously, Lee was only bleeding from cuts on his palms after his baseball slide between the mech's armored legs. Impacts pinged off those legs, and he screamed his terror as he swiped at the display on his wrist, activating a surprise. He looked across the roof in time to see the casings explode off the heavy crates lined up beforehand. Each box rose on four metallic limbs. Each oriented itself toward the incoming fire. Checkerboard shapes popped out of the top of each automated missile box, and a dozen tiny flames raced after their targets. A series of thumps touched off bright explosions atop neighboring buildings. The bullets stopped flying. Lee got to his feet and scrambled up into the cockpit of his mech. No time for easing into the mind-machine connection. Lee puffed 3 quick breaths and jammed his head into the interface crown. 2 giant sledgehammers tag-teamed his temples. His stomach lodged an acid complaint with his throat. He ignored his body and focused on the heads-up display flickering into existence on his retina. As soon as all systems green popped up, he barked a short laugh. That died quickly when a high-pitched alarm tore at his ears and a yellow target box zeroed in on the tower window he had just destroyed. Through his mech's cameras, Lee zoomed in on a blood-stained mech jumping out of that window and engaging its thrusters. With a blink of his eye and a finger twitch, he painted the mech and tasked both missile boxes with vaporizing it. Vibrations ran down both arms as his tri-cannons opened up. Countermeasures from the Earther mech intercepted the fire from his missile boxes. The pilot was skilled enough to attack at the same time as defend, incinerating the missile box on Lee's left with its arm cannons. Something he couldn't see sliced through a chunk of his building, which slid soundlessly towards the ground, like a chunk of butter after the proverbial hot knife, carrying the other pod down with it. Cool, Lee thought. A plasma cannon. He tried not to shit his pants. But it was Lee's turn now. All 3 barrels on both arms unleashed a barrage of railgun rounds and chemically propelled slugs, both small caliber and big bore. His skilled opponent had anticipated the flak and dove below roof level for cover. His scans couldn't penetrate the building, but Lee knew what he'd do in the enemy mech pilot's position. He pounded his mech's legs forward. He was almost at the ledge when the roof behind him exploded. Loud pings from lucky hits rang through the mech's hull. In half a second, the pilot would have a lock on him, and every round fired would explode dead center in his back. Luckily, Lee had wired motion sensors on the 3 narrow cases he dropped on the roof behind his suit. He leaped off the roof, letting himself plummet to the ground. Big explosion. Big shockwave. Once the building was between him and the explosion, he gunned his thrusters, but they still stalled on backwash from the huge explosion. His mind flashed the thoughts. His fingers fumbled for emergency measures, but the thrusters weren't coming back. The ground, however, wasn't going anywhere. The mech slammed face first into a statue of some founding father of Reach, and Lee was unconscious before he fell the rest of the way to the ground. How did they get in here? Noelle raged as she pumped max thrust into the jets on the back of her suit. She told herself this wasn't just revenge. This might be the only way to stall a mass attack. If Noelle stopped the intruder before they reported in, there was a chance she could save more lives. Either way, duty or revenge. She wanted that shooter dead. She fired off a curtain of hot active chaff to distract any missiles defending the sniper. Sure enough, the small cylinders started exploding, absorbing killing blows meant for her. Before the target acquisition warning rattled her already hurting eardrums, the bottom half of her heads-up display flashed red boxes and data for 3 targets on the roof, an enemy mech and 2 missile boxes. The mech's pilot was still wriggling his way inside, so with 2 blinks and a slide of her hand, she dealt with the missile boxes. A full stream from her right tri-cannon blew 1 missile pod into trash. A bolt of plasma screamed out of the vent on her left shoulder. The mech's lights dimmed when she fired, and her energy reserves dropped almost a quarter, but it got the job done. And then some. Plasma bolts had a kill range of 5 kilometers. Under 100 meters, they baked exposed flesh and started fires. Noelle was only 30 meters out when she launched the bolt. It sent the missile box along with a sizable portion of roof down to the ground. Her approach was taking too long. Another shoe was going to drop. Noelle knew it, so she dropped first. Cutting her thrusters shed altitude and put the roof of the building between her and any incoming fire. Laying on the thrust again, she circled the building and climbed, already firing when she cleared the roof directly behind the mech's last position. An explosion savaged her, its shock waves slapping her through the air like a backhanded mosquito. She hurtled end over end, the lights in her cockpit flickering until she cratered through the wall of a neighboring building. The explosion roared over and over. The building shook. She tore through an interior wall like paper before tumbling to a stop in a heap of stone, metal girders, and wall dust. Ivy, Noelle's head, swam in a fog. Her neural interface was gone. She opened her eyes, realized she was coughing on something foul. Suspension foam had filled the interior of the mech, designed to protect her from the impact of her landing, which it had done. It was now suffocating her. She spat out the foam, got her head above the rest of the stuff, and slapped controls inside her pilot's cocoon to no avail. The mech was dead, and the floor beneath her giant metal war machine was shuddering. Eyes widening, Ivy struggled to drag her hands out of their sleeves. Her left came free, but something had crushed the sleeve around her right. The mech lurched, dropping a foot or two. With a roar of effort, Noelle braced her knees and tore her right arm free. Blood welled up on her forearm as she reached her left hand down and pulled the cockpit's manual release. She put her back against the emergency exit and it separated from the mech. She scrambled up and out of the mech as the floor groaned and gave way under its weight. She leaped off an armored leg just before it plummeted through the floor. She landed hard and clawed her way to her feet, stumbling past the hole her mech had made in the interior wall to sag in a door frame and catch her breath. Her head was spinning with the effort of her escape, black spots taking her vision. She reached for her neck, but the thin plastic tubing of her nasal cannula was gone. She slowed her breathing, fought for calm, before the spots ate away more of what little oxygen Reach's atmosphere could offer. Her left arm was bleeding steadily, but nothing life-threatening. She dug in a utility pocket on her leg for a shock exposure infection capsule. She crushed it against her arm, felt the single-use nozzle propel its contents into her body. Her head cleared immediately, the trade-off being instant, severe tingling in her hands and feet. She was alive, though, and had time enough to find enough ox to stay that way. She dug out a field dressing and rolled it over the gash in her forearm, all the while listening for the clank of a mech coming to finish her off. The dressing warmed as it self-adhered to her skin and released a second batch of chemicals into her bloodstream. Less than a minute after Noelle's mech had crashed into the grand building, she was guessing library from the rows of books surrounding her. She pushed herself up against the doorframe and turned to the windows in the outer room. She froze there, disbelieving. A wall of rippling crystal had filled the hole she'd arrived through, seeped through a dozen other cracks, covered and shattered floor-to-ceiling windows from one side of the building to the other. The freshly generated crystal matrix was a deep blue, thick enough to block out the sunlight, thick enough also to block the wail of a siren and wash of jet engines seeping through the library's other walls. Noelle needed to report in to... She drew a deep breath, remembering Commander Winter's brains now coated his office walls. There was no one to report into now. She was command. Noelle jogged for the stairs. You have been listening to Reach, The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Music, All This by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Hear more of the story at servingworlds.com. Thank you for listening.